The sun was setting over the Caribbean Sea, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The waves gently lapped against the shore, creating a soothing melody that filled the air. In a luxurious villa perched on a hillside, William Carter stood, on the balcony, gazing out at the breathtaking view. He had worked hard for years to build his tech empire, sacrificing weekends, vacations, and even time with his family. Now, finally, he had set aside 2 weeks to relax and reconnect with his wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth sat inside the villa, sipping a glass of white wine. She looked elegant as always, dressed in a flowing sundress that matched her perfectly styled, blonde hair. To anyone else, she appeared calm and content, but deep down she felt restless. Her mind was far away from this paradise, consumed by thoughts she couldn't share with William. William turned back toward the villa, smiling warmly at Elizabeth. "Isn't this place amazing?" he asked, walking over to join her. "I thought it would be nice to get away from everything, just you and me." Elizabeth forced a smile and nodded. "It's beautiful," she said softly. But her voice lacked enthusiasm, and William noticed. For a moment he wondered if something was wrong, but then he shook off the thought. They hadn't spent quality time together in months, maybe even years. Maybe all they needed was this trip to fix whatever distance had grown between them. Kier Villa itself was stunning. It had 5 bedrooms, each with its own private bathroom, a massive living room with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a fully equipped kitchen. Outside, there was an infinity pool overlooking the ocean, surrounded by lush greenery and colorful flowers. Everything about the place screamed luxury, and William had spared no expense to make sure their stay was perfect. To take care of their needs during the vacation, the villa came with a small staff. There was Marcus, the friendly groundskeeper, who tended to the gardens and outdoor areas, Rosa, the chef who prepared delicious meals every day, and Clara, the maid who kept the villa spotless. Clara was in her mid-30s with dark skin and kind eyes. She had been working in hospitality for most of her life and took pride in her job. She knew how to anticipate guests' needs before they even realized they had them. On their first full day at the villa, William woke up early, eager to explore the island. He suggested going snorkeling or taking a boat tour, but Elizabeth declined, saying she wanted to rest. Disappointed but not wanting to push her, William decided to spend some time alone. He grabbed a book and headed to the beach, leaving Elizabeth behind in the villa. Clara arrived shortly after breakfast to clean the rooms. As she moved through the house, dusting surfaces and straightening furniture, she couldn't help but notice the tension between William and Elizabeth. They seemed polite enough to each other, but there was an invisible wall separating them. It wasn't unusual for couples to have disagreements, especially when they were under stress. But there was something different about these two. Something didn't feel quite right. Later that afternoon, Clara was tidying up the living room when she heard footsteps approaching. Thinking it was William returning from the beach, she turned around to greet him. Instead, she saw Elizabeth standing in the doorway holding her phone to her ear. She didn't seem to notice Clara at first, so Clara quietly continued folding towels, trying not to intrude. But as Elizabeth began speaking, Clara froze. The language coming out of Elizabeth's mouth wasn't English. It was Russian. Clara didn't understand much Russian, but she recognized the sound of it immediately. Her grandmother used to speak it occasionally when she visited as a child, though Clara herself never learned more than a few words. Curious, Clara paused what she was doing and listened closely. Elizabeth's tone was hushed but urgent, and she spoke quickly as if afraid of being overheard. Clara caught snippets of words like plan, money, and no trace. Her heart started racing. Why would Elizabeth be speaking Russian? And why did it sound so secretive? Clara tried to act casual, pretending to focus on her work while straining to hear more. But just as she leaned closer, Elizabeth suddenly stopped talking and glanced toward the living room. Realizing someone might be listening, she ended the call abruptly and slipped the phone into her pocket. When she saw Clara standing there, she frowned. "Is everything okay?" Elizabeth asked sharply, her voice colder than usual. Clara blinked, startled. "Oh, yes, ma'am," she stammered. "I was just finishing up here." Elizabeth studied her for a moment as if trying to decide whether Clara had heard anything. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Clara alone in the room. For the rest of the day, Clara couldn't stop thinking about what she'd overheard. What was Elizabeth hiding? And why would she lie about speaking Russian? Clara considered mentioning it to William, but she hesitated. She barely knew the couple, and accusing someone of wrongdoing based on a few muffled words seemed reckless. Besides, it wasn't her place to interfere in their personal lives. Still, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over dinner that evening, she mentioned it casually to Marcus, the groundskeeper. Marcus was older than Clara, with graying hair and a gentle demeanor. He had worked at the villa for years and had seen plenty of strange things during his time there. "Do you think Mrs. Carter is up to something?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. He sounded skeptical but intrigued. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But I swear I heard her speaking Russian earlier today, and it sounded suspicious." Marcus chuckled lightly. "Maybe she's just practicing for fun. People do weird things on vacation." Clara shook her head. "No, it wasn't like that. She sounded serious, like she was planning something." Marcus frowned, considering her words. "Well, if you're worried, keep an eye on her. But don't jump to conclusions too fast. Rich folks can be unpredictable sometimes." Clara nodded, though she still felt uneasy. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the conversation in her mind, searching for answers. Little did she know, her discovery was only the beginning of a much larger mystery, one that would change everyone's lives forever. The next morning, Clara woke up early, her mind still buzzing with questions. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had overheard the day before. Elizabeth's voice replayed in her head, her hurried tone, the strange words in Russian, and it left Clara feeling uneasy. She wanted to believe that Marcus was right, that maybe Elizabeth was just practicing a new language or talking to a friend for fun. But deep down, Clara knew something wasn't right. As she got ready for work, Clara decided to keep her eyes open and observe more closely. If Elizabeth really was hiding something, there might be other clues. Clara didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she also didn't want to ignore what could be important information. After all, William seemed like a good man, and if his wife was up to no good, he deserved to know. When Clara arrived at the villa, everything appeared normal. William was already outside by the pool, reading a book and sipping coffee. He looked relaxed, happy even, as if the trip was doing exactly what he had hoped it would, helping him unwind. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. Clara assumed she was still in her room, which wasn't unusual. Elizabeth rarely joined William for breakfast and often stayed in bed until late morning. Clara started her day by cleaning the kitchen and dining area. Rosa, the chef, was busy preparing a fresh fruit salad and a stack of pancakes for William. The two women exchanged polite greetings, but Clara kept her thoughts to herself. She didn't want to involve anyone else in her suspicions. Not yet, anyway. After finishing the kitchen, Clara moved to the living room. It was tidy from the previous day, but she went through the motions of straightening cushions and wiping down surfaces. As she worked, she glanced toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. She wondered if Elizabeth was awake and, if so, whether she'd make another secretive phone call. Her curiosity got the better of her. Pretending to rearrange some flowers on the side table near the hallway, Clara lingered close enough to hear any movement coming from Elizabeth's room. Sure enough, after a few minutes, she heard soft footsteps and the faint sound of a door opening. Elizabeth emerged, dressed in a silk robe, holding her phone in one hand. Clara quickly turned back to her task, pretending not to notice. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched as Elizabeth walked to the far end of the living room, away from where William sat outside. Once again, Elizabeth began speaking quietly into her phone. This time, however, Clara couldn't catch any specific words. Elizabeth spoke too softly, and Clara dared not move closer for fear of being caught eavesdropping. Instead, Clara focused on the little details. Elizabeth's body language was tense, her shoulders hunched slightly forward as if trying to shield her conversation from prying ears. Every now and then she glanced around the room, checking to see if anyone was nearby. When their eyes briefly met, Clara froze, afraid Elizabeth might suspect her of listening. But Elizabeth simply gave her a quick nod and continued talking. When the call ended, Elizabeth slipped the phone into the pocket of her robe and headed back toward her bedroom without saying a word. Clara exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. Her heart raced as she processed what she had just witnessed. Whatever Elizabeth was involved in, it clearly wasn't innocent. The secrecy, the constant phone calls, it all pointed to something bigger than Clara could fully understand. Later that afternoon, while tidying up the master bedroom, Clara stumbled upon another clue. Elizabeth had left her phone on the bedside table, its screen glowing as it charged. Normally, Clara avoided touching guests' belongings, but this time, her curiosity overwhelmed her sense of caution. She glanced toward the doorway to make sure no one was watching, then picked up the phone. It was locked, of course, but the lock screen displayed a notification, a single line of text written in Russian. Clara didn't recognize the exact words, but the sight of the unfamiliar alphabet sent a chill down her spine. Why would Elizabeth have messages in Russian, and who was sending them? Before Clara could think further, she heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, she set the phone back down just as Elizabeth entered the room. For a split second, Clara thought she'd been caught, but Elizabeth merely smiled and said, "Oh, thank you for cleaning in here. I'll take care of my things now." Clara nodded nervously and stepped aside, her pulse pounding in her ears. As soon as she was out of the room, she leaned against the wall, trying to steady herself. She felt torn between fear and determination. On one hand, she didn't want to meddle in the Carters' private affairs. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth was hiding something dangerous, something that could hurt William. That evening, after her shift ended, Clara confided in Marcus again. They met near the garden shed, away from prying eyes. Clara recounted everything she had seen and heard, including the mysterious message on Elizabeth's phone. Marcus listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked when Clara finished speaking. "You're not just imagining things?" "I'm sure," Clara replied firmly. "Something's going on, Marcus. I don't know what it is, but it's not normal." Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I get it. You're worried, but messing around with rich people's secrets can get you into trouble. These folks have connections, money, power. They don't take kindly to nosy employees." "I know," Clara admitted. "But what if Elizabeth is planning something bad? What if William's in danger?" Marcus hesitated, weighing her words. Finally, he said, "If you're serious about this, we need to be smart. Don't confront her directly, and definitely don't tell William unless you're absolutely certain. Let's gather more evidence first. See if we can figure out what she's up to without risking our jobs, or worse." Clara nodded, grateful for Marcus's advice. Together, they came up with a plan. Over the next few days, they would keep an eye on Elizabeth, documenting any suspicious behavior. Clara agreed to pay extra attention to the Carters' interactions, while Marcus offered to monitor the villa's security cameras, which were installed discreetly throughout the property. The following morning, Clara arrived at the villa with renewed focus. She tried to act as normal as possible, avoiding any behavior that might raise suspicion. William greeted her warmly, thanking her for keeping the place so clean. Elizabeth barely acknowledged her presence, which suited Clara just fine. Throughout the day, Clara observed Elizabeth closely. She noticed how Elizabeth spent long periods alone in her room, often emerging with her phone in hand. Whenever William suggested doing something together, taking a walk, exploring the island, or having dinner, Elizabeth either declined or made excuses. At one point, Clara overheard William asking Elizabeth if everything was okay. Elizabeth brushed him off, saying she was just tired. By the third day, Clara's patience paid off. While cleaning the living room, she accidentally knocked over a small vase sitting on the coffee table. Water spilled onto the floor, and Clara quickly grabbed a towel to clean it up. As she bent down, she noticed something sticking out from beneath the couch, a folded piece of paper. Curious, Clara picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The paper contained a list of numbers and symbols, along with a few words in Russian. It looked like some kind of code or ledger. Clara's stomach churned as she realized the significance of her discovery. This wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. It was proof that Elizabeth was involved in something secretive and possibly illegal. Clara slipped the paper into her pocket, intending to show it to Marcus later. She knew it was risky to take it, but she couldn't let such crucial evidence slip away. For now, she resolved to stay calm and continue observing Elizabeth, gathering as much information as she could before deciding her next move. As the sun set that evening, Clara stood on the villa's balcony, staring out at the ocean. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil brewing inside her. She had always believed in doing the right thing, but this situation was far more complicated than anything she had faced before. Still, one thing was clear. Whatever Elizabeth was hiding, it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. The next morning, Clara woke up feeling a mix of determination and anxiety. She had spent the night tossing and turning, replaying everything she had discovered about Elizabeth in her mind. The piece of paper with the strange numbers and Russian words was safely tucked away in her bag, but it weighed heavily on her conscience. Clara knew she couldn't ignore what she had found any longer. Whatever Elizabeth was involved in, it was serious and potentially dangerous. When Clara arrived at the villa, Marcus was already waiting for her near the garden shed. He looked worried, his brow furrowed as he paced back and forth. When he saw Clara approaching, he stopped and gestured for her to come closer. "Did you bring it?" Marcus asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby. Clara nodded and pulled the folded piece of paper from her bag. "Here," she said, handing it to him. "I found this under the couch yesterday. It looks like some kind of code or ledger." Marcus unfolded the paper and studied it carefully. His eyes widened as he scanned the numbers and symbols. "This isn't just random scribbling," he muttered. "It's organized, like records or transactions, and the Russian word, they look like instructions." Clara frowned. "Transactions? You think Elizabeth is doing something illegal?" "I don't know for sure," Marcus admitted, folding the paper back up. "But this doesn't feel like harmless stuff. We need to figure out what it means, and fast." The two of them decided to split their efforts. Marcus would try to decipher the paper, using his old laptop to search for clues online. Meanwhile, Clara would continue observing Elizabeth and William, keeping an eye out for anything unusual. They agreed to meet again later that evening to share what they had learned. Throughout the day, Clara kept herself busy with her usual tasks, trying not to act suspicious. She cleaned the villa meticulously, making sure everything was spotless. William seemed grateful for her hard work, complimenting her on how well she maintained the house. Elizabeth, however, barely acknowledged her presence, which suited Clara just fine. As the morning turned into afternoon, Clara noticed that Elizabeth was acting stranger than ever. She spent most of her time locked in her room, only emerging, occasionally to pace around the living room or step outside for fresh air. Whenever William tried to engage her in conversation, she gave short, vague answers before retreating back into silence. At one point, Clara overheard William asking Elizabeth why she seemed so distant. "Is there something wrong?" he asked. Shortly. "You've been acting different lately." Elizabeth hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "I'm fine," she said finally, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." William didn't look convinced, but he didn't press her further. Instead, he sighed and went back to reading his book by the pool. Clara watched the exchange from a distance, feeling sorry for William. He clearly cared about Elizabeth, but it was obvious that something or someone was driving a wedge between them. Later that afternoon, Clara had another close call. While tidying up the master bedroom, she accidentally bumped into Elizabeth, who was standing near the dresser. The impact caused Elizabeth's phone to slip from her hand and fall onto the floor, cracking slightly along the edge. "Oh no," Clara exclaimed, bending down to pick it up. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carter. I didn't mean to." "It's fine," Elizabeth snapped, snatching the phone from Clara's hands. Her tone was sharp. almost panicked, and she immediately checked the screen for damage. Clara froze, her heart racing. As Elizabeth examined her phone, Clara caught a glimpse of the screen. It was still unlocked, displaying a text message written entirely in Russian. Though Clara couldn't read the language, she recognized enough to see that it contained phrases like final transfer and Moscow. Elizabeth quickly locked the phone and stuffed it into her pocket, glaring at Clara. "Be more careful next time," she said coldly before storming out of the room. Clara stood there for a moment, her hands trembling. She had seen enough to confirm her worst fears. Elizabeth wasn't just hiding secrets, she was planning something big and possibly criminal. But what exactly was she involved in? And how could Clara prove it without putting herself in danger? That evening, Clara met Marcus near the garden shed again. He was sitting on a wooden bench, his laptop open in front of him. When Clara approached, he looked up and gestured for her to sit beside him. "I did some digging," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "The numbers on that paper, they look like bank account details, and the Russian words are instructions for transferring money." Clara's eyes widened. "So Elizabeth is stealing money?" "It's possible," Marcus replied. "From what I can tell, she's communicating with someone named Victor. I couldn't find much about him, but based on the context, he might be tied to some shady business dealings." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you think William knows?" Marcus shook his head. "If he did, he wouldn't let her stay here. My guess is she's been hiding this from him for a while." Clara nodded slowly, piecing everything together. Elizabeth had married William for his wealth, using their relationship as a cover for her schemes. Now she was planning to take millions from his accounts and disappear, possibly with Victor's help. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get proof," Marcus said firmly. "Something concrete that shows what Elizabeth is up to. Once we have that, we can decide whether to tell William or go straight to the authorities." Clara agreed, though the thought of confronting Elizabeth terrified her. Still, she knew they didn't have a choice. If they didn't act soon, Elizabeth might succeed in her plan, and William could lose everything. Over the next few days, Clara and Marcus worked tirelessly to gather evidence. Clara kept a close watch on Elizabeth, noting every suspicious phone call and late-night meeting. Marcus, meanwhile, continued researching Victor and the mysterious transactions. They communicated through subtle gestures and quick whispers, careful not to raise suspicion. One night, Clara struck gold. While cleaning the kitchen, she noticed Elizabeth leaving the villa with her phone in hand. Curious, Clara followed her discreetly, staying hidden behind bushes and trees. Elizabeth walked down to the beach where a man was waiting for her, a tall, broad-shouldered figure dressed in dark clothes. Clara crouched behind a rock, straining to hear their conversation. Though she couldn't understand the Russian words they spoke, she recognized Elizabeth's tone. It was urgent, almost desperate. After a few minutes, the man handed Elizabeth a small envelope, which she tucked into her pocket before hurrying back to the villa. Once Elizabeth was gone, Clara crept closer to where the man had been standing. She spotted a scrap of paper lying in the sand, partially buried beneath footprints. Picking it up, she realized it was a receipt for a wire transfer of several $1,000,000. Clara's hands trembled as she stared at the document. This was the proof they needed. With shaking fingers, she tucked the receipt into her apron and hurried back to the villa, her mind racing. She couldn't wait to show Marcus what she had found. When she reached the garden shed, Marcus was waiting for her, his face lighting up when he saw the receipt. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We've got her." Clara nodded, though her relief was tinged with fear. They had uncovered the truth, but now came the hardest part. How would William react when he found out? And what would Elizabeth do if she realized they were onto her? For now, Clara and Marcus decided to keep the evidence safe. They would wait for the right moment to reveal it, knowing that timing was everything. Until then, they vowed to stay vigilant, watching Elizabeth's every move. As the sun set over the Caribbean Sea, Clara stood on the villa's balcony once again. The beauty of the scene offered little comfort, overshadowed by the weight of what she now knew. The luxurious vacation she had once admired now felt like a facade, a mask hiding betrayal and deceit. But despite her fear, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Justice was within reach, and she was determined to see it through. The next morning, Clara woke up with a sense of purpose. She had spent the night going over everything she and Marcus had discovered: the receipt for the wire transfer, the coded paper, and Elizabeth's suspicious behavior, all pointed to one conclusion. Elizabeth was planning to steal from William and run away. It was a betrayal so shocking that Clara could hardly believe it herself. But now that they had proof, it was time to decide what to do next. Clara knew this wasn't just about protecting William anymore. It was also about doing the right thing. If Elizabeth got away with her plan, it wouldn't just ruin William financially. It could destroy him emotionally. And if Victor and his associates were involved, there might be even darker consequences. Clara couldn't let that happen. After breakfast, Clara met Marcus near the garden shed again. They sat on the wooden bench, speaking in hushed tones so no one would overhear them. Marcus held the receipt and the coded paper in his hand, studying them carefully once more. "We have enough to go to William," Marcus said finally. "This is solid proof. He deserves to know what's happening." Clara nodded, though her stomach churned at the thought of confronting William. What if he didn't believe her? Or worse, what if Elizabeth found out and retaliated? Still, Clara knew they couldn't keep this secret any longer. "You're right," she said quietly. "But we need to be careful. If Elizabeth suspects anything, she might try to leave before we can stop her." Marcus agreed. "Let's wait until tonight. By then, we'll have figured out exactly how to approach William. In the meantime, keep an eye on Elizabeth. Don't let her out of your sight." Clara spent the rest of the day observing Elizabeth closely. She noticed that Elizabeth seemed more anxious than usual, constantly checking her phone and glancing toward the front gate as if expecting someone. Whenever William tried to talk to her, she brushed him off, claiming she had a headache or needed some fresh air. Clara began to suspect that Elizabeth was preparing to make her move soon. That evening, after finishing her cleaning duties, Clara joined Marcus in the garden shed. Together, they rehearsed what they would say to William. They decided to present the evidence calmly and clearly, letting the facts speak for themselves. They also agreed to emphasize that their only goal was to protect him, not to cause trouble or drama. When the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the villa, Clara and Marcus made their way to the pool area where William was relaxing. He looked up as they approached, surprised to see them together. "Is everything okay?" he asked, setting down his book. Clara hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Marcus stepped forward, holding out the pieces of evidence. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk to you about something important," he said. "It's about Elizabeth." William frowned, sitting up straighter. "What about her?" Clara took a deep breath and started explaining everything. She told him about overhearing Elizabeth speaking Russian, finding the coded paper under the couch, and discovering the receipt for the wire transfer. She showed him both documents, pointing out the details that suggested foul play. Finally, she described seeing Elizabeth meet with the mysterious man on the beach. William listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When Clara finished, he stared at the papers in disbelief. "Are you saying my wife is stealing from me?" he asked, his voice shaking. "It looks that way," Marcus said gently. "We didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is clear. She's been planning this for a while." William leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. Then anger replaced his sadness. "How could she do this to me?" he muttered, clenching his fists. "I trusted her." Clara felt a pang of guilt. She hated being the one to deliver such devastating news, but she knew it was necessary. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she said softly. "We didn't want to tell you unless we were certain." William nodded slowly, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Thank you for telling me. he said finally. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found out until it was too late. What are you going to do? Marcus asked, cautiously. William stood up, his jaw set with determination. I'm going to confront her, he said. But first I need to gather some things, emails, bank statements, anything that can confirm what you've told me. If she's been stealing, from me I'll make sure she pays for it. Clara and Marcus exchanged worried glances. Be careful, Clara warned. If Elizabeth realizes you know, she might try to leave immediately. I'll handle it, William assured them. For now, don't say anything to her or anyone else. Let me deal with this. With that, William headed back into the villa, leaving Clara and Marcus alone by the pool. They watched him go, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. They had done their part, but the hardest part was still ahead. Later that night, Clara lay awake in bed, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the conversation with William in her mind, wondering how Elizabeth would react when confronted. Would she deny everything? Try to manipulate William? Or worse, would she turn violent? As dawn broke the next morning, Clara arrived at the villa early, her nerves on edge. To her surprise, everything seemed eerily quiet. William wasn't outside by the pool, and Elizabeth's bedroom door was closed. Rosa and Marcus were already at work, but neither of them had seen William yet. Clara knocked lightly on William's office door, hoping to check on him. There was no answer. Frowning, she pushed the door open slightly and peeked inside. The room was empty, but his laptop was open on the desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and printouts. It looked like he had spent hours gathering evidence against Elizabeth. Just as Clara was about to close the door, she heard raised voices coming from the living room. Heart pounding, she crept closer and peered around the corner. William and Elizabeth were standing face to face, their expressions tense and angry. You think I'm stupid? William demanded, his voice cold and sharp. I know what you've been doing, Elizabeth. I have proof. Elizabeth's face went pale. For a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression hardened. Proof of what? She snapped, feigning innocence. You're accusing me based on rumors and lies? It's not rumors, William shot back. I have receipts, messages, everything. You've been stealing, from me, working with someone named Victor. Don't bother denying it. Elizabeth's mask slipped, revealing the truth beneath. She let out a bitter laugh. Fine, she said, crossing her arms. So you know. What are you going to do about it? Call the police, ruin your precious reputation? William's eyes narrowed. I should, he said, but instead I'm giving you a choice. Leave now and never contact me again. Or stay and face the consequences. Elizabeth sneered. You wouldn't dare. You care too much about appearances to admit your wife is a criminal. I don't care about appearances anymore, William replied firmly. All I care about is justice. For a moment the room fell silent. Then Elizabeth grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back to glare at William. You'll regret this, she spat. Mark my words, and... With that, she was gone. Over the next few days, the villa felt strangely empty without Elizabeth. William stayed mostly in his office, sorting through legal documents and contacting his lawyers. Clara and Marcus continued their duties as usual, though they kept a watchful eye on William, making sure he was okay. One afternoon, William called Clara into the office. He looked exhausted but grateful. I wanted to thank you, he said. If it weren't for you and Marcus, I might never have known the truth. Clara smiled shyly. We just did what we thought was right. Well, it means a lot to me, William said sincerely. And I'd like to repay you somehow. Is there anything I can do? Clara shook her head. No, thank you. Just knowing. We helped is enough, William nodded, smiling faintly. Still, I owe you both. Maybe someday I'll find a way to show my gratitude. As Clara left the office, she felt a sense of closure. The truth had come to light, and justice was being served. Though the experience had been difficult, Clara knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing wasn't easy, but it was always worth it. The days that followed Elizabeth's departure were quiet but tense. William spent most of his time in his office working with his lawyers to untangle the mess she had left behind. Clara and Marcus went about their duties as usual, though they couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. The villa, once filled with laughter and luxury, now felt like a shadow of its former self. Clara often found herself thinking about Elizabeth. Where had she gone? Had she managed to escape with the money, or had Victor abandoned her? Despite everything, Clara couldn't shake the image of Elizabeth standing on the beach, speaking urgently with the mysterious man. She wondered if Elizabeth had truly believed she could pull off her plan without getting caught, or if she had simply been desperate enough to try. One morning, as Clara was tidying up the living room, William emerged from his office looking more composed than he had in days. He greeted her warmly, thanking her for her hard work. "I know this has been a difficult time," he said, "but I'm starting to see a way forward." Clara nodded, smiling faintly. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Carter." William hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I wanted to let you know that my lawyers have traced some of the stolen money. It turns out Elizabeth didn't get very far. Most of it is still tied up in accounts we can recover. We've also contacted the authorities about Victor and his associates. They're looking into it now." "That's good news," Clara replied, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had worried that Elizabeth might succeed in disappearing completely, leaving William with nothing. "It is," William agreed. "But there's something else I need to tell you." He paused, his expression softening. "Elizabeth wasn't just stealing from me. She was involved in something much bigger, a scheme connected to Victor's criminal network. From what my lawyers have uncovered, it seems she planned to use my money to fund illegal activities abroad." Clara's eyes widened in shock. "That's terrible." "It is," William said grimly. "But thanks to you and Marcus, we stopped her before she could cause even more damage. You saved me, not just financially, but maybe even from danger." Clara shook her head modestly. "We were just doing our jobs." "No," William insisted. "You went above and beyond, and I won't. Forget it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you, a token of my gratitude. Please don't refuse it." Clara hesitated, but when she saw the sincerity in William's eyes, she accepted the envelope. Inside was a generous sum of money, more than she had ever imagined receiving. "Thank you," she said softly, but honestly. "Knowing we helped is reward enough." William smiled. "Still, I hope this will make a difference for you. You deserve it." Later that day, Clara shared the news with Marcus during one of their breaks. They sat together near the garden shed, watching the sun dip low on the horizon. Clara told him about William's revelations and the envelope he had given her. Marcus whistled softly. "That's quite a story. Sounds like Elizabeth got in way, over her head." "She did," Clara agreed. "And it's scary to think about what might have happened if we hadn't figured it out in time." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Still, you handled everything perfectly. I'm proud of you, Clara." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had doubted whether she'd made the right choice by confronting William. But now, hearing Marcus's words, she knew she had done the right thing, even if it hadn't been easy. As the days turned into weeks, life at the villa began to return to normal. William seemed lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He started spending more time outdoors, enjoying the sunshine and ocean breeze. Occasionally, he would invite Clara and Marcus to join him for lunch or a walk along the beach, expressing his gratitude once again. One evening, as Clara stood on the villa's balcony, she reflected on everything that had happened. The trip that had started as a luxurious escape for William and Elizabeth had taken a dramatic turn, revealing betrayal, lies, and ultimately justice. Clara realized that sometimes the truth could be painful, but it was always better than living in ignorance. Her thoughts drifted to her own future. The money William had given her was more than enough to change her life. She dreamed of using it to start fresh, maybe opening her own small business or pursuing an education she had always put off. Whatever path she chose, she knew she would carry the lessons she had learned here with her. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Turning around, she saw William approaching, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Mind if I join?" "You?" he asked. "Of course not," Clara replied, stepping aside to make room for him. They stood together in comfortable silence, gazing out at the ocean. After a while, William spoke. "Do you ever wonder why things happen the way they do?" Clara tilted her head, considering the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think everything happens for a reason, even the bad stuff. It teaches us something." William nodded slowly. "I think you're right. If it weren't for this trip, I might never have realized who Elizabeth really was. And I wouldn't have met someone like you, someone brave enough to stand up for what's right." Clara blushed at the compliment. "I was just doing what anyone should have done." "Maybe," William said with a smile. "But not everyone would have." The 2 of them stayed on the balcony until the stars came out, talking about hopes, dreams, and second chances. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt hopeful about the future. The Billionaire's trip may have taken a turn, but it had led to justice, and for Clara, a new beginning. Far away, in a dimly lit apartment in Moscow, Elizabeth sat alone, staring at her phone. Her plans had crumbled, her connections severed, and her future uncertain. As she scrolled through unread messages from Victor, anger and regret bubbled inside her. She had gambled everything, and lost. But back at the villa, under the starlit sky, Clara raised her glass of water in a silent toast. To courage, to truth, and to the power of doing the right thing, even when it's hard.